So hello everyone, I am Vidit Chawda and I welcome you all to the fourth video of DSA Bootcamp. So the last topic that we studied was array, and in this particular video we are going to solve few questions on arrays, and the platform that we are going to use to solve question is going to be lead code. So this is the lead code, most of you might know, and here you can see, like, when you start the lead code you have an option to expand. So after you expand you can see that there are multiple tags present of different topics. So if you want to solve the question of array, we are just going to click on array. So when we click on the array, we have multiple questions are going to be appearing on the screen with different difficulty levels. You can choose and you can solve whichever question you want. And before we start solving the question, I would like to tell you that if you have not seen the previous videos, it is going to be difficult for you to understand whatever is going to be taught in this video. So I would suggest that you should first go and watch the previous two videos that has been uploaded in the playlist, and only after that you are watching these videos. Okay, so in this video we are first going to solve this question. So now before we start solving question, and since this playlist is going to be completely on C++, so in lead code and in many other platforms and many other places you might see that instead of arrays this vector keyword is being used, right? So before we start solving questions, I would have to first tell you what vectors is, right? So I'm not going to tell you all the basic theoretical difference between arrays and vectors. I'm just going to give you a short overview so that you can start solving questions, right? So first I would have to initialize an array, int array of, let's say, size 4, and let's store some values 1, 2, 3 and 4, right? And similarly, arrays and vectors are completely similar to each other. Arrays also stores the elements in contiguous memory blocks, and vectors are also going to do the same thing. But here, if we don't initialize an array with any element initially, if you just declare an array with declaring it with some size, it is going to store the garbage value in all the positions or all the memory blocks, right? But in case of vectors, when we initialize a vector and like when we declare a vector and we don't initialize it with some value, it is by default going to store 0 as the initial values of all the memory blocks that has been created. So what does it mean? It means that when we create an array or when we declare an array, it is not going to take the memory space until we initialize it with some value. But when we declare a vector, it is going to take a memory space, since it is declaring all the positions or all the blocks by 0, right? So it is going to take some space initially, but array is not going to take any space. So now let us declare a vector. So the syntax of declaring a vector is, first we are going to write a vector keyword, then inside smaller than and greater than bracket we are going to write the data type of that particular array. So array can be of any type, any data type, right? It can be int, it can be float, it can be character array, right? So here we are going to declare an int array or int vector, so we just have to write the data type inside this, and then we can write the name of the vector, right? So let's say, right, we have written the name of the vector as nums, and we have created the vector, right? So now let us try to take input inside this vector, right? So we are going to do that using arrays, using loops. So initially we don't have anything inside this vector, right? So how to take an input inside this vector? So let us initialize it with some size, let's say 4, right? And so that we should know how many times our loop should run. So in this case, in the case of vectors, there are some pre-inbuilt functions that we use, like pushback and erase, delete. So there are some inbuilt functions that we use in case of vectors which are not present in case of arrays. So I'm not going to tell you all the functions. If you want, you can Google it, but I am just going to tell you all the basic functions that are going to be needed by you while you are going to solve the questions, right? So first, now we are going to take the input inside the array. So first we are going to declare a variable. Then we are going to take the input from the user for that variable, and then we are going to simply push that variable inside the vector. So the name of our vector is nums dot push back x, right? So this is the function that we use to push back. This is going to do nothing but going to push the element at the last empty position of the vector. Okay, so now let us try to print the vector. Int I is equal to 0, and also we can use a size function instead of directly writing 4. Now let's use the function called nums dot size. So when we use this function, inbuilt function, it will do nothing but it will just replace that the term that you can see, that nums dot size, it is going to be replaced by the size of the vector, right? So now we'll simply print the elements of the vector. Let us run the code. So first we are going to input some elements inside the vector. So let us input 1, 2, 3 and 4, right? So now you can see that in the output it is printing 1, 2, 3, 4 and also few zeros. So the problem that occurred here is, as I already told you, that vector stores 0 at the initial as an initial value in every position. So since we declared here the size of the vector as 4, if you don't declare the size, if now the vector has we have not declared the size of the vector, right? So initially we have just declared the array, but we have not declared the size. So what it has done, it doesn't have allocated any memory inside the, it doesn't have allocated any space inside the memory, right? So what happened in this case is we initialized it with 4 size, right? So it allocated the memory of size 4 with 4 memory blocks, which has 0 as initial value inside it, right? So and when we pushed back, when we used the pushback function, it just pushed 1, 2, 3 and 4 at the end, right? So after the last 0, it started pushing the values to the back of the vector, right? So now I have not initialized it with any value, and now if we try to run, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can see that when we printed the vector, just 1, 2, 3 and 4 was printed. So the mistake that I made was I initialized it with some size, and what it does, when we initialize it with some size, it takes the space from the memory and it initializes that number of blocks with 0. And when we push any element from at the back of the vector, it is going to start pushing it after that the memory that has been already allocated by it, right? So now you can see that this is how a vector works. It is completely similar to the array in case of storing the elements. The way it stores the elements in the array data structure, vector is also going to store it in the similar kind of way in contiguous memory blocks. Just there are few basic differences that I told you, that initially if we don't initialize anything inside the array, it is going to store a garbage value, and in case of vector, it is going to store 0. And secondly, we have not declared the size of vector here, and that is why we called a vector as dynamic array, right? Because we have not declared the size, and we can append the elements, we can append that vector with any number of elements that we want. But in the case of array, we need to declare the size, and we cannot append it in future. So this is the basic difference between arrays and vectors. And these are the few functions like nums.size and nums.pushback that we are going to use while we start solving the questions, right? So the first question that we are going to solve here is, you can see it in the screen. The name of the question is toSum, right? So let us try to read the question and let's see what it has been asking from us. So first line says that given an array of integer nums, so we are given an array which is of integer data type and it is called nums, and secondly we have an integer called target. Now we need to return the indices of two numbers such that they add up to the target. So now what basically we have to do is we just have to return two indexes which is which are having the numbers, and when we add those numbers we add up to the target, right? So now it is going to get much more clear when we see these examples. Now before that we read the next lines, and it says you may assume that each input would have exactly one solution and you may not use the elements twice. You can return the answer in any order. Okay, so the first thing says, first part of this statement says that you can assume that the input that has been given by the user has exactly one solution, right? So this line is really important to understand, that the input that we have taken from the user just exactly has one solution, right? It might have more than one solution. There might be more than one solution of the particular question, right? Like, because the question says that there are two numbers, we just have to return the indexes of the two numbers. So there can be more than two numbers which can add up to the target, right? So but it has been said in the question that there exists only exactly one solution, right? So accordingly we can code then, right? So you cannot miss this statement, it is really important. And after that it has been said that you may not use the same element twice. Now you can see here in the example 2. Okay, I'll explain it to you in the sequence. I'm not going to skip any part. I'm going to explain this statement when we come to the explanation of this example too. So now let us try to understand. And before that, it has also been said that you can return the answer in any order. So these two statements will be understand when we'll try to understand these examples, right? So according to the first example, you can see that it says that input of nums has four elements, 2, 7, 11 and 15, and target value has 9, right? So according to the question we just have to return the position. What do you mean by indices means it starts from 0 and it's nothing but the position of that particular element inside the array, but it starts from 0, not from 1. So if it is asked to you that what is the index of 2, you will have to say that it is the index of 2 is 0, index of 7 is 1, index of 11 is 2, index of 15 is 3, right? So since it has been started from 0, the index, there are 4 elements, but the index of 15 is going to be 3. Okay, so we have to return the indexes of two elements in the array which add up to 9. So here you can see 2 and 7, these are the two numbers that adds up to 9, right? So you can see that 0 and 1 is the output. 0 is the position of 2 and index of 2, and 1 is the index of 7, right? And when we add nums 0 and nums 1, we are going to get 9. So we have simply returned 0 and 1. So according to the question, we can return the answer in any order. What does it mean? It means that you can even return 1 and 0 or 0 or 1. It doesn't matter, right? You are not going to get any error. Your test cases are going to be passed. So you don't have to worry for that. Okay. So second example, here you can see 2, 3 and 4. There are three numbers inside the vector and the target value is 6. So now 4 plus 6 is going to be 6, right? So the position or the index of 2 is 1, right? Because it starts from 0. The position of 2 is going to be 1 and the position of 4 is going to be 2, right? So it has returned 1 and 2, but here you can see that 3 is also present. If we add 3 twice, same element twice, we are going to get 6, right? But according to the question, you can see that you may not use the same element twice. So it has been clearly mentioned in the question that you cannot use that particular element twice, right? So we have to check while we are coding the question, we have to mention that condition that we don't use the same element twice, right? And third example is also the same. Since they are at different positions, right? although both the elements are 3, but both the elements are at different indexes. We can use them. We can use the same value only if they are at different indexes, right? So here there are just two elements, so the output is going to be 0 and 1, right? So now let us start coding. So the first brute force approach that comes in my mind when I look at the question is we have to use nested for loop, right? We need to fix a pointer at the first position, and we need to traverse the whole array, and we have to check if there is any other element. If we add the first element with any other element inside the array and we get the target value, then we are going to return the two indices, right? So for that we need to use nested for loop, and you can see in the question that the return type of that particular function, this is the function toSum function, the return type of this particular function is vector int, so it is also going to return a vector. So we have to return the answer in the form of vector of two elements. Since we have to return two indices, the size of the vector is always going to be 2, right? So we declare vector. First we need to create a vector, right? Vector of int, and let's call it nums1, right? So now we have created a vector, and inside this vector we are simply going to store the indices of the elements, right? So now we have created a vector. Now the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to run nested for loops, right? So nested for loop, initially starting from 0, I less than nums dot size and I plus plus. Again we are going to run a loop inside this loop. So now what we are going to do is, since we started this loop from the 0th index, let's start this loop from the last, right? So what we are basically doing is, I'll tell you with this example. We have initially in the first iteration we have fixed our pointer to 2, right? Now our first value is always going to be 2. Now what is going to happen is the second pointer is going to be on 15. Pointer is going to be on 15. We'll add 2 and 15 and we'll check if it is equal to 9. If it is equal to 9, then we are going to return the indices. If it is not equal to 9, then we are simply going to check it for the next value. So we have started from next, so we are going to decrement the pointer to 11. Then we are going to decrement the pointer to 7. And if we didn't get the answer, we are going to, the second iteration is going to run, and in the second iteration 7 is going to be fixed, and it is going to check all the other values. It will add all the other values and check all the combinations, right? So here in the next inside the inner for loop, we are going to start it from the size nums dot size -1, and j should be greater than 0, and we'll decrement the value every time, right? Every time the iteration is going to be completed, we are going to decrement the value. As I told you that if we don't find 2 and 15 to be equal to 9, we have to decrement the value of pointer, and it should point 11 then, right? So in this case you can see that 2 and 7, if we add these two numbers, we are going to get 9, right? So how many times this loop is going to run is the inner loop is going to run 3 times and the outer loop is going to run once, right? So here we need to check the condition, right? Before we start writing our logic, the first condition should be if nums of I plus nums of j is equal to target. Since in this case the target is equal to 9, we are not going to write 9 here, right? The target value is stored in this target, right? So we are going to write equal to target. And the second condition that we have to write inside this loop is, like it is written here, you may not use the same element twice. So as I already told you that we just don't have to use the element at same index, right? So the condition that we are going to write here is I should not be equal to j, right? So this is a very important and necessary condition. If you don't write this condition, your answer is going to be, it is not going to accept your answer. The test cases are going to fail, right? So if we get this thing, now what we are going to do this after this, we just have to push, as I told you here, right? we use a pushback function to push the elements inside the vector. So the first thing that we are going to do is nums dot push back I, and nums1 dot push back j. Okay, so now what I have done is, if this condition satisfies, if the element I and element j of a vector adds up to the target, and at the same time the index are not same, then push both the indexes inside the vector that we have created. Now the second thing that we have to do here is, we need to break the looping if we got the answer, right? So now for that, what we are going to do is, since we have to return just two indices, right? So when the size of nums becomes 2, we have to stop looping, right? So for that, I'm going to write a condition: if nums1 dot size is equal to 2, if the size of the nums becomes 2, I'm writing it outside the first loop, right? I need to write it outside the first loop. This condition has to be written outside this first loop, right? So if I write it inside this and I break the statement, I break the looping, it is going to break the looping of the inner loop, right? But we need to break the main loop, which is outside, outer loop, right? So I'll just write break. If it becomes 2, just break looping and return the answer. So now we are going to simply return the nums. So now let us try to run the code and let's see if we have correctly coded the question or not. Okay, so now you can see that there is some error. Okay, so what is the error? Yes, the mistake I made is I incremented j. I should decrement it, right? So now let's see. So you can see that we have run the code and it has accepted our code. Now let us submit and check if all the test cases are passed or not. So now you can see that it has accepted and all the test cases have been passed. So this was the first question, and now we are going to solve the next question in the next part of the video. Thank you. Okay, so in the previous part of the question, we solved a question on arrays, which was particularly on linear arrays. So this question is going to be based on two-dimensional arrays, right? So there are two types of arrays that we have studied in our previous video. So this is going to be on two-dimensional array, and since we have used vectors in the previous video, here also we are going to use vectors, and I'll tell you how to use vectors in place or in the case of two-dimensional arrays. So let's get on to the question. So question says that you are given an m into x integer grid, which simply means we have been given two-dimensional array of name accounts, where accounts I comma j is the amount of money of ith customer which he has in the jth bank, right? So what does it mean? It means that I comma j element. So let's suppose this particular element, what does it mean? It means that the ith customer is the amount of money that he has in jth bank, right? So it means that, okay. So the next line says return the wealth that the richest customer has. A customer's wealth is the amount of money that he have in all their banks. The richest customer is the customer that has the maximum wealth. Okay, so now let us try to understand what question says. Question says that each line or each row of the particular two-dimensional array is nothing but the amount of wealth the particular customer is having. So what does it mean? That the first row is going to represent the first customer, second row is going to represent the second customer, basically wealth of the second customer, right? If we sum up all the elements in the first row, we are going to get the total wealth of that particular ith customer, right? So in this case, let us like see the explanation. You can see that the first customer has wealth is equals to 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equals to 6, and second customer is also having 6. So what these two customers are having the same amount of wealth. When we add up all the wealth that he has in all the banks that he have, so since the amount is same, we are simply going to return 6, right? So in this, let's see the second case. In second case, you can see that there are three customers. So three customers having three different wealth, and the second customer is having the highest amount of wealth. So we have simply written wealth. So now let us try to understand this second example with a quick visualization. So here you can see that I have made a two-dimensional array. What does it mean? I'll tell you what we have passed inside this function. So you can see that we have passed the vectors of vector inside this function, right? Which has a name called accounts, right? So what do you mean by vectors of vector? Vectors of vector simply mean that it is a vector which has the elements as a vector. So what a first element is going to be? First element is also going to be a vector. So you can see this itself is a vector of size 3, 1, 2 and 3, and inside this the first element is having two elements. So what does it mean? It is all itself a vector, second element is itself a vector, third element is also a vector, and this whole is also a vector. So vector of vector is nothing but two-dimensional array, and this is how we represent a two-dimensional array, right? So this question is based on two-dimensional array. Now let us try to solve this question. So how to approach, what should be our approach to solve this question? So first what we are going to do is we are going to add this amount of wealth that we are given, and we'll store it inside a new vector. We'll create a new vector, we'll add this sum of the first customer wealth of that he has in different banks, and similarly we'll do it for the second customer, and we'll store all the sum all the wealth of different customer in a particular array or in a particular vector. Then we'll simply compare and we'll find out which customer is having the maximum wealth, and we'll simply return it, right? So for that, first we are going to create a new vector. Let's say vector int, and let's name it wealth, right? So this vector is nothing but going to store the total sum. Like you can see that 1 2 plus 3 is 6, so this is going to store 6 comma 6. So all the sum of different customers which they are having in different banks, right? So since this is a two-dimensional vector, we have to use nested for loops, right? So first for loop int I is equals to 0, I less than, now how many times this loop should run? In this case we are having 2 into 3 2 cross 3 matrix. In this case we are having 3 cross 2 matrix. Here in this case we are having 2 cross 3 matrix, right? So user can enter any amount of different kinds of matrices, right? So how to get the correct size, right? So for that, what we are going to do is we are going to write the name, as I told you in the previous question, that we have a size function which returns the size of the vector. So this itself is a vector, right? So what would be the size of the vector here? The size of the vector here is 1 2 3, right? And the size of the inside vector is 1 2. So what we are going to write to get the size of the outer vector, we are going to write accounts dot size. This is going to return the size of the outer vector or the main vector, and for the inside vector int j is equals to 0, j less than accounts dot I dot size, and j plus plus. So what do I mean by accounts of I dot size? So it simply means that accounts dot I means in the first iteration we are going to be at the first element of this vector. First element is this, which has two size, So first it is nothing but it is going to return the element, I mean the size of the first element. That is why we have written accounts of I dot size. Now what we are going to do inside this, we need to simply sum up all the wells, all the elements, and store it inside a temporary variable. So first let us create a temporary variable. Let's say int a is equals to 0. Now what we are going to do is we are going to add all the elements of this particular vector, or this particular row of the two-dimensional array or two-dimensional vector, and we'll store that in a temporary variable. Then we are simply going to push that temporary variable inside this wealth, right? So for that we are going to write account plus is equal to operator. This is nothing but an operator which we use in C++, and we have already taught you about different types of operators in our first video. So if you have not watched that video, I would suggest please first go and watch that video. So accounts of I comma j, I of j. So this is going to store the sum of all the three elements. In this case, let's say speak in this case 1, 2 and 3. It will sum of 1, 2 and 3, and it will store that value inside a. Now what we are going to do is we are going to store that a inside, or we are going to push that a inside the wealth vector that we have created. So for that we'll write wealth dot push back. I've already told you about pushback function in the previous question. So we have pushed that value inside the vector. Now this loop is going to run. And one more thing I would have to do is, like, now we have what we have in a after the first iteration we are going to have, let's speak in this case, we are going to have 6 stored inside this a. Now when the second iteration is going to start, again the calculation or the operation is going to be performed. So since a is already having 6, so all the values that are going to be added up will be added to 6, right? So we again have to initialize a with 0. So every time the iteration is going to run, we need to initialize a with 0. So that is why we need to write a is equals to 0 every time the inner loop is out, I mean outer loop is going to run, right? So now what we have done is we have calculated the sum of all the amounts that he has in of a particular customer that he has in different banks, and we have stored it in a wealth vector. Now the only work we have to do is we need to find out which is the maximum amount, right? So for that, first let us create a maximum variable. And what we are going to do here is, in this variable is we'll suppose that the first element of the wealth vector is the maximum value, right? So let's store the first element of the wealth vector in this max variable. Now let us run the for loop, and let us traverse the whole array or whole vector, and let us find out that is there any other element which is greater than this max element. If there is, then store it inside the max vector, right? So for that what we'll do is we'll write I less than wealth dot size I plus plus, and inside this we'll write a condition that I told, if there is any other element wealth of I greater than max. Max initially has the first element, so if there is any other element greater than max, then store it inside the max. So max is going to have wealth of I if it is greater than, only if it is greater, this code is going to run if this condition is going to get satisfied, right? So now we also have the maximum element of the wealth vector, or we can say the customer having the highest amount of wealth, we have stored it inside the amount of wealth that wealth is stored inside the max. Now we simply have to return max. Let us try to run and see if we are getting the correct output. Okay, I made a mistake here. Okay, so there is also some another mistake that we have made. Count. Okay, so count dot size I should have written accounts. Here also, rest everything is fine. So you can see that our code has been accepted. Now let us try to submit and check if all the test cases are getting passed or not. Okay, so you can see that all the test cases have been passed. So this was all about the video. We solved two different types of questions of linear array and two-dimensional array. I hope it was very interesting for you to not just learning the concept but also solving the questions on it. And thank you for watching the video. Let's meet in some another video. Till then, bye bye and thank you for watching the video again.